Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about a cautionary tale, so to speak. We're going to talk about 401k escheatment. Not limited to 401ks, but I shouldn't say usually, but one of the big risks of 401k abandonment is escheatment, and we're going to talk about what that means, how to avoid it, and kind of the logistics of it. So first of all, just to back up a little bit. So whenever someone changes jobs and they have an old 401k plan they leave behind, generally it's very reasonable, and my advice generally tends to be to roll that over to an IRA. There are many reasons for that. Well, I shouldn't say many. There's more than one reason for that. One reason is to just keep it organized so you don't forget about it, just to make sure that you don't leave it hanging out there kind of in a place where you're not paying attention to it, and having it organized within your financial picture is valuable. Two, generally rolling it over often gives you better and more options when it comes to investing. 401k plans are fairly vanilla. They're limited to, a handful of investments, and your options are usually fairly limited. So with your own IRA, you generally have more options, and these can be more suitable and more appropriate for you. So those are two really good reasons to roll over old 401k plans. There is another reason we're going to talk about today, and that is the risk of escheatment. And it's kind of a funny word, but it means it's really the process by which abandoned assets get turned over to the state. So what happens is if you hypothetically, in theory, if you leave behind assets, in this case, we're talking about, let's say, a 401k plan, for example, after changing jobs, and that account is sort of becomes labeled as inactive or abandoned after a certain period of time, usually it's about 5 years, then the process starts for escheatment, which means the assets are being turned over to the state. And that's what happens often when you have unclaimed or abandoned assets like a 401k plan. So let's talk about how this happens, kind of what the mechanics of it are and how it happens. So first of all, there's various reasons you might lose track of old money, old 401k plans sitting out there. One might be that you switched jobs, you didn't roll it over. Maybe you moved, maybe you switched to a different email account. You're not using the old one, or the old one's not checked very often, and you just sort of become disconnected from it. You don't log in ever. You really have no contact with that old 401k account. It becomes inactive. It becomes abandoned. So what happens is the financial institution holding your money in these cases is required to try to find the account holder. They have to try to find you. But again, if you've moved, if you've updated information, if you've changed information, haven't updated it, maybe you don't check that email account anymore, maybe you've changed phone numbers, maybe a lot has changed and you just aren't responding to inquiries, and you aren't logging into the account, you aren't moving money to and from it, you're not cashing any dividend checks that might come, you have zero interaction with that account, then they may not be able to contact you. They may try, for a while over and over and not be able to actually contact you. So when that happens, the financial institution may turn over that money to the state government after a certain period of time. And again, this is generally about 5 years, but it varies state by state. So you want to check your state's laws. So here's the good news, though. The good news first is that the money doesn't just get swallowed up and disappear forever. It does allow you to go back and reclaim those funds later. So you go to sites like unclaimed.org, for example, and you can track down that money and see if you can reclaim it. The bad news, though, is that generally these funds end up being liquidated into cash, which means that your investment is being unplugged. It just turns into cash, which, as you know, is not going to make any money for you. So there's a disadvantage of that. In addition, on top of the just the pain of and the high maintenance aspect of trying to track it down and get a hold of it. So again, every state is different in how long it takes for this to happen. Generally 5 years is pretty common, but some states have different rules. So it kind of is a state by state process. You want to make sure you look into your state's rules for that. And again, if you find that you want to track down old money that's been escheated, you would go to unclaimed.org as one example to track that down. So how do you avoid this? How do you avoid having your old assets, especially like a 401k plan, become escheated? One is to, first of all, log in and keep interaction going with the account. So let's say in theory, you're not going to roll it over right now for whatever reason. Again, I recommend rolling it over, but let's say you're not going to roll it to an IRA. maybe it's just not something you're paying attention to right now, you want to at least log in. The types of activity that trigger an institution to say, oh, well, there's activity and this has not been abandoned, are logging into the account online, having a phone call with a representative, actually calling the organization and having some sort of customer service interaction, responding to a mail or an email notice that you get, cashing any dividend checks, moving money in and out of it, changing investments. All those things indicate activity. All those things are telling the institution that this has not been abandoned, that the account holder is actively interacting with the account. General growth and general dividend distribution does not count as activity. So, for example, if dividends are being generated and reinvested or mailed out, or the account is growing because it's invested, those things don't count as activity. You have to actually literally interact with it as a human to indicate that it's not been abandoned. So the other thing you want to make sure you do is keep your contact information updated. So if you have an old 401k plan that's not being rolled over for whatever reason, make sure you log in and make sure your address is correct, your phone number, your email address, all that stuff is current, because they do have to try to contact you before any kind of escheatment process starts. And if your contact information is current and up to date, then they'll be able to contact you and you can say, hey, yes, I am still attached to the account. I'm interacting with it. It's my account. You can avoid that escheatment process. Also, cashing dividend checks. This isn't very common, but let's say you have dividend checks that are mailed to you from an investment account. If you cash those checks, then that counts as activity. So, in general, I wouldn't say this is super common. It does happen, but I wouldn't say it's super common. It's something that is a risk, though, with an old 401k account. So you want to make sure that you avoid letting accounts become abandoned. And again, generally, my advice is the best way to avoid this risk is to roll those assets over, roll the old 401k into an IRA. Sometimes it does make sense to roll it into your new employer plan. There are reasons for that. Not as often, but there are reasons for that. And more commonly, I recommend rolling it into your own IRA. So that is a way you can avoid that risk of escheatment. So again, those are it's more than one reason to roll that old 401k over, and one reason is to avoid the risk of escheatment, which again is the state swallowing up your money, and then you have to kind of track it down. So stay active with those accounts, and if it makes sense for you, get those rolled over. So hope that's been helpful today. As always, if you want to talk about this, or if you want help tracking, old accounts down, or just want to chat about what your options are or what's going on in your financial life, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on the web at elevationfinancial.com, and you're welcome to just send me a note there or book a complimentary money session, and we can talk about any questions you might have. So thanks everyone for joining me today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.